Holy Magic Century, also known as Quest 64, was panned by the critics and gamers alike, receiving less than impressive scores by the magazine publications and considered a pitiful excuse of an RPG of its time. But despite this game's reputation, it has its fans, and as of recently, I've become one of them. I know because I like this game, I'm in the minority and totally going against the consensus that this is a bad game that should be avoided, and for the longest time I did just that. Now in my early teens, when this first came out, I really wanted to play this, and after reading magazine reviews and talking to other gamers in the schoolyard, I decided for the longest time to pass on this. That wasn't until last year when I bought a bundle of cheap N64 games, and one of those titles was this very game. Now it was only recently I decided to give this game a go, and you know what, I really enjoyed it. So for this week's episode of Michael's Retro Game Reviews, I'm reviewing Holy Magic Century, also known as Quest 64, a game that is hated by most, but loved by a few, including me. Holy Magic Century has at least one claim to gaming fame. It was the first role-playing game on the N64, and this was a huge deal for its time, because the N64 was starved of role-playing games, and throughout the system's life it only received but a handful. You have to give this game credit, it was ambitious to create a game like this on the N64. The belief held amongst gamers of the time was that the N64 couldn't do more grounded data hogging type games because of the limited storage space held in cartridges. Later in the system's life, games like Zelda Ocarina of Time, Perfect Dark, Conker's Bad Fur Day, and the amazing port of Resident Evil 2 that proved beyond a doubt that with clever programming and compression, the 2-disc epic was possible on the N64. Just don't expect CD quality audio or FMVs on par with the PlayStation. But the point I'm trying to make is there were always good games on this system. It was games like these that changed people's preconceptions of the N64. But unfortunately, this game came out at a time when people still had mixed feelings about the system and were not sure what to expect or what was even possible on it. I think this is one of the first games to really flex the N64's graphical capabilities with graphics that were very ambitious for the time, and by early N64 standards were considered impressive. Like Mario 64, which was an amazing launch game with a certain overly colourful look to it, that was more out of necessity than design choice to save on memory. Because textures take up space, so almost everything just had a colour shading placed upon the wireframes. And that's why Mario 64 could get away with using the smallest N64 cartridge. With Quest 64, everything had textures mapped upon it. This helped to give the world of Holy Magic Century a look with a certain degree of depth and detail to it. And the graphics in this were also clever in masking some of the system's limitations that years later developers learned to work around. Just look at this forest, it looks very eerie with some cool fogging going on, helping to set the creepy mood of that area. But I suspect this fog effect was done to hide the draw distance that would clearly have been seen without it. But fog aside, this game has good design choices made with the graphics that give you the feeling of being in a wide open, colourful world with plenty of interesting things to look at, and all the while without the system's limitations impeding the look of this adventure too much. When you look at this game from a fresh perspective, you can clearly see its graphics have aged, but that's the great thing about retro gaming, you can see beyond the graphics and see it for what it is and not what it isn't. And in that mindset you can clearly see it's just simply a beginner's RPG. Now, my recollection of RPGs when growing up was you were either in or out. There were not many middle ground type RPGs out there, and I think that's why this game was hated by the critics for its simplicity, and loved by a few for just that, its simplicity. For anyone getting into retro gaming RPGs, but wants something a little more simpler to cut the teeth on, this is a good place to start. But be warned, it is a short game. I read online that most people finish it in just over 10 hours, and on my first playthrough it took me just over 14 hours to complete this game's story, which by the way is really simple, and I mean simple with almost no depth to it. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, as with games like Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VII, etc, games like that can be very emotionally overwhelming, and if you want something that's a little bit more light-hearted and requires no emotional investment on your part, then a game like this is your ticket. And by ticket, where would you buy one in this game? Oh right, you can't buy stuff. Now, this is one of the issues that gamers had with this game. More experienced RPG players like to buy items and gear, but as this game was designed with more younger players in mind, the belief was that younger gamers would prefer to find these items by exploring this world, instead of buying them. I can't fault their logic, but when you release an RPG onto a console that's the start of RPGs, you're gonna get older players playing this, and they would expect to be able to buy things in this game. My only complaint about this is I would have preferred to have been able to stock up on healing items, but if you ration the few healing items you find for the more tougher battles, and just heal yourself in the wild using healing magic, which is one of the magics of water, you will be just fine. But one warning, if you have no healing items and have to resort to healing magic to heal yourself in battle early in the game, then the battle is lost and you're only delaying the inevitable game over screen. So replenish your health with healing magic before and after battle, and only use healing items in boss battles, and that also goes for special items too. But back to what I was saying about finding stuff. What this game does is encourages you to explore this world instead of just, let's say, go from a castle straight to the nearest dungeon, without much exploring on your way. And I did enjoy that aspect. Maybe the inner child of me was pleased, who knows. But any game that tries to be different in a way that gets you to do something you wouldn't normally do is a good thing, I think. You might have to check an online walkthrough at least once or twice on your first playthrough. Most of the time, if you talk to everyone you meet at least once, you'll have a fairly clear idea what you should be doing and where to go next. As NPC characters you talk to will give you information that gives you insight into this game's story and events that have transpired that lead you to make the odd detour to help people or townsfolk with their problems, that in turn helps to open up paths for you to continue on your journey. Even with all the information I gathered from talking to NPC characters, I still said to myself, where the hell am I meant to go next? When this game came out, this would have been an issue, but with the internet, tablets and smartphones, you can just pull up a guide and this allows you to focus on the journey. Because for me, this game felt like a journey. Sure, the story is simple, but exploring this world and completing this game felt like a worthwhile experience. So how satisfying is that experience? I would say fairly satisfying. So let's get to the heart of Holy Magic Century, aka Quest 64, the gameplay. Because at the heart of the RPG experience is the gameplay. Sure, nice graphics and music is a bonus, but the reason we play RPGs is to go on a journey, level up, and gain experience in more ways than one. Leveling up in this game is done in an interesting way. First, each of your stats individually levels up. That is clever because how you play this or how good you are as a player will determine how your character levels up. So let's say on a regular basis you get attacked a lot. Your defense will level up quicker than the rest of your stats. This means a less than capable player, if he sticks with this game, will be able to complete it because by the time he gets to the end of this game they will have a high defense. Or, if you move around a lot, you will find your agility levels up faster and the distance you can move in battle will greatly increase with each additional level. Same goes for attacking and magic too. So instead of having a typical level up system where all your stats improve as your main level levels up, in Quest 64 everyone's level up progression will be slightly different. Now element magic, not magical ability, levels up in a completely different way. Throughout this game you find magic crystals, but you can also gain them by leveling up your I guess you would call this your magic crystal meter? Which means as you level up your character, he will gain magic crystals on a regular basis. So you don't need to find them all, but if you want an advantage in battle, then I suggest when you go to a new area, do a bit of exploring and see what you find. You assign each of these crystals to one of the 4 elements, earth, wind, water and fire. And how you use each of these magics in battle is by pressing the corresponding C button to the magic, as all 4 elements are mapped to the C buttons. When you press, let's say C down, you get to use any of the magics associated with water. I don't think I've ever played a game with a system quite like this before. A good tip for later in the game is when you get past the halfway point, is to mainly focus on leveling up 2 of your elements. Reason for this is, in trying to equally level up all your magics will take a long time. And by the second half of this game, all you really need to finish it is a high level water because of its healing magic, and also the main attack that is associated with it is very effective with some enemies in close range. Another one worth focusing on is earth. I wouldn't say earth is the best magic, but I found it often more useful than other element magics. That's not to say fire and wind were completely useless. There were a few times early in this game where I faced certain enemies, and the only way I found to make a dent in the defense without having to resort to whacking them with my staff was by using them. Later in the game I mainly got away with just using earth because boulder and avalanche, both magics of earth, could deal out a decent amount of damage to pretty much every enemy in the later half of this game. So experiment with how you level up your element magics and see what works best for you. One piece of advice: if you want to complete this game, level up Earth past 36. Now at 36 you also gain the ability of Barrier, and without this particular piece of magic it'd be nearly impossible to finish this game. One of the main criticisms this game got was its camera system. Now I'm on the fence about whether the camera system was flat out bad or just quirky with a few minor issues to it. Sure, at times it's not behind you where it should be, but did people forget about the B button? Look, see, now it's behind me. And if you keep hold of the B button, the camera will stay behind you. So, problem averted, right? Not quite. After a battle in the open world, the player is left facing in a random direction every time. And quite often I lost my bearings, and by the time I worked out where I was and what direction I needed to be going in again, I was yet in another battle. Battles are a bit too frequent, but that aside, if you're in a dungeon and win a battle and did not run away from it, the camera will face where you were last facing, so it's not all bad. No self-respecting role-playing game can't be complete without a decent soundtrack, and this game doesn't fail to deliver. While the PlayStation 1 was the console of choice for the RPGs of its time, with many games utilising the CD format to best of effect, in finally delivering a fully rendered music score. But Quest 64 also achieves this by synthesising what sounds like a full orchestra performance of this game's soundtrack. While it doesn't have many podcast-worthy tunes in it, it still overall does a good job in helping to give this game a grand epic feel to it that only a good soundtrack can do. What finally sold me when reviewing this game was its history. Before Quest 64's release, there was a lot of hype surrounding it, as it would be the first RPG on the N64. Early game sales were promising, but as soon as the magazine review scores came out, sales started to slip. But despite that, this game still sold well enough to be a financial success, and a good starting point to hopefully build a successful game series upon. Sometime after the initial release of Quest 64, it was announced that the Japanese localization would be tweaked to fix this game's problems, with new content added to expand further upon this game, and going under the original working title for this game, which was Irotao Monzatsu, which in English is L-Tail Monsters. When you look again at the sales numbers and see that almost all the game sales were in the USA and Europe, you can take a calculated guess and say it wasn't very well received in the East. Well, let's move on. Next year at the 1999 Space World, Quest 2 was announced. Sometime later after this announcement, Imagineer, the developers behind the Quest series, came into financial difficulties. Through the company reshuffle and restructure that had to happen to save Imagineer, Quest 2 was cancelled. I guess for a game company that was on the verge of bankruptcy, Quest 2 was just out of the question. Or maybe they always intended to return to this game series when the dust had settled on the company's problems. But we will never know if this was the case or not. All we would ever know of this game was one concept image, and that Quest 64 sequel would be set 100 years after the first game, and have two playable characters, a boy magician and a girl sword wielder. So that would mean if, and a big if this game had been made, it would have tried to bring the series back to having multiple playable characters, a feature that was dropped from the first game. Knowing this game's history gives you a new appreciation for the series that never was. We can all agree Quest 64 didn't have the best start, but had its fans, and if Quest 2 had been made and addressed the problems of the first game, while giving more experienced RPG gamers a game with more depth, while keeping its beginner RPG status, as not to alienate its existing younger fans at the time, Quest could have been a gaming franchise still with us today. But sadly, that was never meant to be. So, my final thoughts. For a first game of its kind on its respective system, I don't think it's that bad. Sure, it has its faults, but had there been a sequel, I'm sure they would have been addressed. And as far as RPGs go, for more experienced players, this is a rather simple game, but for newcomers to old school RPGs, or people looking for a more simple RPG experience, then I'd recommend this game. This game gets the Yeah, that's a good question. I think it deserves a thumb approval, but the problem is this game isn't for everyone. So watching this review will do two things. It will either make you interested in playing this game, or it will point out a game for you to avoid. So on that note, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.